Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, checking out this new album from Frankie and the Studs, Life's a Glitch. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So Frankie and the Studs just released their debut studio album, Life's a Glitch, on March 27th. They've been making noise over the last couple years, though. They're a rock band out of LA. They've released several singles. I think they've released maybe 5 or 6 singles since 2019. And all those tracks have gotten really good reviews so far. So I had some, I shouldn't say high expectations for this album, because I really didn't know what to expect. But I was expecting this to be a similar quality to those singles. Frankie and the Studs is a California rock band fronted by Frankie Clark. And I think they draw a lot of inspiration from the 70s punk scene. You know, if you think of bands like the Ramones, the Clash, the Runaways, I think they have a lot of that sound throughout this album. But they also blend in some of the 70s glam also. If you think like New York Dolls, I think is a good comparison to some of the stuff on this album also. I know what you might be thinking. That's a lot of praise to put on a newer band, but I think they're definitely onto something, at least with this album. They've already opened for some big acts. They opened up for the B-52s. They've opened for the Struts. They also opened up for Billie Joe Armstrong, which she actually makes an appearance on this album. I think this band is definitely on the right track. For their debut, the band wanted to approach the songs on this album with almost having this almost like a live sound in mind, and they wanted to have the energy of their shows really come through in the music on this album. And as someone who thinks a lot about track listing, I think it's something that largely gets forgotten about nowadays in the streaming age that we live in, where people just kind of listen to random songs or just kind of a collection of songs. That's kind of what albums have become, mainly, is just a collection of 8, 10, 12 songs on an album. It's kind of refreshing to see a band go into the recording studio and have an intended purpose of what they want to do with the track listing. The band wanted to have this almost like a live show track list in mind for the way they wanted to sequence this album. So going into this album, I didn't really know what to expect. I was only casually aware of the band before. I'd listened to, I think, their first 2 singles that they released back in 2019, and that's really all I knew of the band. So sitting down and listening to this album, I didn't really know what to expect. And I was really impressed with this album. I think this is definitely a band that if you are a rock fan, if you're a 70s punk fan, this is an album I think you really have to listen to. It has this raw and powerful sound that I think is largely missing from a lot of newer bands. There are some new bands, some new rock bands that do put out some really good albums. I feel like there's a lot more misses than there are hits. And I feel like that's because the way music or rock music has evolved over the last 40 years. And it's great to see a band like Frankie and the Studs going back to the roots of punk music and glam rock back in the 70s. The album kicks off with a high-powered song, Hole in My Head, which was previously released as a single back in 2019. And kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier about track listing, having that first track to be this really kind of big tone setter for your album, because, to be honest, a lot of people just stream music nowadays. And when you go to stream a new album, especially from a band you've never heard of before, I think having that first song really kind of grab them in is really important, because a lot of times you're only going to get a song, maybe 2, and then if people aren't really all that interested in what they're hearing, they're just kind of move on to something else. And also, since the band wanted to construct this album to have more of a set list kind of feel, this would also be a great song to open up a live show with. And I think it's always the right decision to pick one of your strongest songs to lead an album out with, and that's exactly what they did with this one. And then following a Pull in My Head is the song Bimini, which was also released as a single last year for this album. And the song opens with this great guitar riff that really kind of carries on throughout the song. And, the first time I listened to it, the song kind of has this almost 90s alternative feel to the song. And I think it's a really good contrast to the high energy you're getting off that lead track. This kind of shifts the tone a little bit while still having a cohesive feeling with the opening track. And then the first new song on this album falls in the 3rd spot with Head Rush. And this is another one of those songs that kind of takes you back to the higher energy that the album started out with. I think this album so far really fits into this narrative of having this almost set list kind of feel because of the variations you're getting through the first several songs on it. And then following up Head Rush is the song Flash, which is another song that was previously released as a single back in 2019. And the thing is with this song is kind of knowing that these were previously recorded, previously released songs, you can hear the band really kind of finding their sound across those first couple of singles, really kind of perfecting what they wanted their sound to be by the time they would make it to recording and releasing this album. The first time I listened to this album, I got to the song Here I Lie, and it almost has this kind of jarring sound because of how so drastically different it is, at least at the beginning of the song musically, from what came before it. It's another new song from the band. It has this almost kind of early 90s grunge hole sound. It's a song that's already become one of my favorites on this album. And I think Here I Lie is a perfect example of the versatility of this band. When I got to the song Fuck This Shit, I kind of laughed the first time I listened to it because, first off, it has this kind of really cool lo-fi kind of sound to it. But, going through the lyrics of this song, I think pretty much everyone out there that has had a terrible dead-end kind of job can easily relate to this track. The only ballad-ish kind of song on this album is Not This Time. And it has this almost kind of like haunting sound to the song. And this is a perfect example of what Frankie and the Studs do so well on this album that a lot of newer rock bands really struggle with. And it's a lot of newer bands have that same kind of sound across every song on the album. And you can have good songs that way, you can have good albums that way, and there are some bands that do that. But overall, at least a lot of the ones in the mainstream, that's something that they really struggle with. And it's something that didn't happen a lot, 15, 20 years ago and earlier than that. You always had some of these kind of songs across an album. But having this really good change of pace song, a really drastic change of pace, 2/3 of the way through the album, gives an overall different feel to the end of the album. And then you've got Billie Joe Armstrong making an appearance on this album with the cover song Venus, which, of course, Shocking Blue released back in 1969, and then Bananarama released it in 86, which I was always more aware of the Bananarama version because I was like 6 or 7 years old when that version came out. I didn't really get around to even listening to the Shocking Blue version until probably 15 or 20 years after I heard Bananarama. But both of those were big hits. They hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. I think this is a really interesting song for the band to cover, and they do a great job with it. And typically I'm not a big fan of cover songs, but these are the kind of covers I enjoy. It's when a band takes a song that's not really necessarily in their style, and they take it and they make it their own while still kind of staying true to the original version. It's something you just don't see a lot of newer bands doing today. And while the vinyl version of this album ends with the song Losing You, which I think is a great bookend to Hole in My Head, which is the opening track, it's a good way to open and close this album. The streaming and the CD version of this have 2 additional songs. So you got Some Kind of Love and She's Insane, which I don't think are quite as good as Losing You. I think they should take those last 2 songs and kind of bump them up and have Losing You be the final song on all versions of this album. I think Losing You is easily one of the strongest songs on this album. It's something that, kind of going back to talking about track listing, you want to open with a really strong song, but you also want to finish the album on a strong note also. So some of my favorite songs on this new album, Hole in My Head, which, like I said, that's that lead track, does a great job opening up the album. Head Rush, Here I Lie, Not This Time, Venus, which is, like I said, that great cover on there, and Losing You. I think those are the strongest songs on this album. As far as skippable tracks, I don't really have any. There's not a single skippable track on here. There are definitely some songs that are stronger than others, but there's nothing on this album that I would say is bad enough that you can just skip right over it. And this album was recorded, mixed, and produced all by Paul Miner, who's probably best known as the former bassist for Death by Stereo. But he's also done a lot of production work over the years. I know he's worked with Newfound Glory, he's worked with Thrice, he's also worked with The Casualties, so he's done a lot of stuff across multiple genres. And as far as how this album is produced, I think it's one of the better produced albums over the last several years. A lot of newer rock albums fall into the same kind of trappings of, having way too much effects on there. A lot of newer albums are all overly compressed. Even bands that have been around for decades fall into those same issues. And you really have none of that across this album. So my overall thoughts on this album, I think Frankie and the Studs are definitely heading in the right direction musically. Going through this album, like I said earlier, you can hear some big influences from the 70s, You can also hear some 80s on there. You can hear some, 90s alternative influence also. And they do a great job blending all that together on this album. If I'm going to rate this album 1 to 10, I'd really, I think, honestly, I think it's got to be a 9.5 for me. Really, the only issues I have really are those extra 2 tracks. I think they should have been slid in front of Losing You. Maybe would have had a little better of a sound to wrap up the album with. And in their own way, I don't think either one of those songs are necessarily bad songs. I just think Losing You was a stronger song and it would have ended the album a little bit better. I think it was really the only thing I could knock this album on. So if you're somebody out there that has been looking for new rock bands to listen to and you have been widely disappointed by a lot of newer rock, this is definitely a band for you to check out. So if you want to check out Frankie and the Studs and listen to this new album, they're available on Apple Music. They're available on Spotify. I'll put links down below if you want to go check out the website also. And as for the physical version of this album, I do have the standard black version that the band was nice enough to send me a copy of. That's the front cover of it there, if I can get it straight on my camera. And then it's the back cover. And then it does have, there's an insert in here also, with just the lyrics from the album and the credits on there. So that's what the insert looks like. It's plain on the back of it. And then this is just on standard black wax here. I will say that I give Frankie and the Studs a lot of credit because new albums typically come in like just a paper sleeve, the scuff up the album. I give them credit because they came in an anti-static sleeve. I think it's kind of cool, especially for a band that's selling an album for less than $30. You generally don't really see that. The band sent me this the standard black version here. I wanted to support this band though, so I went on their website. There is a limited colored version. I think it's like 100 to 150 copies that they pressed of it. I bought a second copy of it, so I'm waiting for that to come in the mail to me. And that's something I typically do. If a band sends me music to review, I always try to go back on their website and buy a copy, just as a way to support the bands, especially the smaller bands like this. So the way I always wrap up these review videos is I ask, is this an album that I would own a physical copy of? Of course it is, because I've already bought one. I will probably buy this album on CD also. I've streamed it a bunch of times. So far, I know it's early in the year, but so far, I think this is my album of the year so far. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what you guys think of Ranking the Studs. Have you listened to this album yet? I highly recommend you going out and listening to it. I was blown away by it. I didn't really know what to expect going into this album, and it far exceeded any expectation I had. But I'd love to know what you guys think of this album. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a little thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.